Great, thanks, Leanne. And so this is Mark Watt speaking today. On the line with me, I do have my colleague Bonnie Lacusta, who's our evaluation specialist. And so I'm thankful that she's going to participate in our presentation today just to help make sure we have a real rich and robust learning environment. And as Leanne had commented, we know that there are lots of questions that we may or may not have contemplated in the area of providing physician feedback. And so we absolutely encourage you to share some of your questions or what you hear from the physicians or providers that you're working with so that we can continue to enhance our content and our products for you. So we'll absolutely be looking forward to your questions and comments. In the next 45 minutes or so, what we're hoping to do is to talk a little bit about preparing to share chart review results with providers. Today we are having a bit of an interactive review of the report, so we wanted to review the baseline report. So that would have been a report that you would have seen a practice one of in our training session. Today we'll do a bit of a review of what that baseline review means and some of the questions you might anticipate. And we're also giving you a bit of a preview to the follow-up chart review report that providers will complete 4 months after they've completed the baseline review. And as well, we'd like to introduce you to a report we're calling a provincial baseline report, which is the aggregated baseline chart review results from all participants in the project, and what that might, what value that might provide to yourself and to providers. We'd like to tackle some of the things that we think are common questions from providers, and what are some questions that you might have as improvement facilitators working with providers to challenge them back in terms of their improvement journey. We'll talk just briefly around this is just one of many things that is an ongoing support to you in your role as an improvement facilitator in a quality improvement program. And then, of course, we invite your questions and feedback throughout, and we'll make sure that we have a particular moment at the end to pause for that. So some of you who are perhaps a little bit farther along in the ASaP journey have submitted a super form to TOP and perhaps even some chart review information from a provider, and then you've received this email back from Alberta Screening and Prevention that is a report for a provider. And you may have some questions. What do I need to do with this email? What does this document mean? What are some of the questions the provider may have? And what is it that what questions would I have of this information that I might want to share with the provider? And so those are some of the things that we hope as improvement facilitators, those are questions that are going through your mind, and we're going to do our best to answer them. So as we know from our training, practice facilitation increases the adoption of evidence-based guidelines 2.76 times. So we know that there is incredible value when you have a change agent working directly with people in a practice to make changes. We've also know from the literature, particularly through the work of Jeremy Grimshaw, that disseminating print evidence at best achieves a 10% change in practice. So if we just send out this report to a physician in an email and expect them to read it and change practice, we know that we will get a little bit of uptake, but at the same time we suspect that having that facilitated conversation is where the real richness occurs. And so we've tried to design the chart review report so that it would facilitate that conversation between an improvement facilitator and the provider and team. So we're going to move into an actual report or a sample of a report and some of the elements that you will find in there. So for example, in the baseline chart review report, there's an introductory letter. there is some important information and overview, as well as some the overall screening rate. And then finally, we provide that detailed screening rate. It is a very information-dense document, and so today we'll spend a bit of time kind of breaking down these different sections and what are some of the important messages that are included or attached to this report. So, being that the people on the line have had a chance to come to the training session, and perhaps they've even received one of these chart review reports back for their providers, what might be the purpose of having the cover letter attached to the chart review? And so, some of the things that we think about are that this is an opportunity to remind the provider what this information is related to. We hear that physicians get an opportunity to participate in 366 opportunities a year, and this cover letter might be just to remind them which of those activities this is related to. This could be an acknowledgement of their commitment to improving patient care. This could also be, this letter could also seek to clarify that this is a measurement being used for improvement. And lastly, it could be used to describe, who is seeing this report. It's been sent to me by an email, so that means that somebody else must have been participating in this. So who all has seen this data? So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to ask my colleague Bonnie if she has any thoughts in terms of why was it important and what were some of the key messages related to this cover letter.
I would guess, Mark, that all of those might be right, and that the cover letter introduces several topics for the provider.
Excellent, Bonnie. That is indeed what we intend to cover in that letter. And as you can see here, this is a copy of the letter, and it includes those 4 very important key messages. So if we were trying to distill it into some really succinct pieces, there is an acknowledgement, there is a discussion that this information is about improvement and supporting their journey towards an improved patient care. It talks about who can see this data, or who has participated in the collection and the dissemination, and also who would they go to if they have questions about this report. Moving on to the second page of the baseline chart review, again, very information-rich document, and really wanted to draw your attention to these bullet points. We've tried to make these stand out as much as possible because we think that there is so much value that when you're considering all of the information in this report, these are some very specific things that you're going to want to be aware of when interpreting these results. So specifically, we talk about improvement and not judgment. And sometimes that's a difficult concept for people, and particularly for providers who come from a world of really strong research background and from a position of being accountable for patient care. So really, describing what the difference between improvement in research or improvement in judgment means is that this is a starting point, and that the end goal is that they're doing something better, or attempting to do something better as a result of this information. We recognize that scope of practice is an important element, and that while they're making a strong commitment towards the maneuvers in the ASaP, that they also have a duty to provide other elements of care, and those elements of care are just as, or sometimes more important than these maneuvers. And so there's a lot of reasons why the agenda when having a patient interaction might not be focused on screening. Again, for those who've come through training, we know that we're focusing on the documented interactions. And that's an important distinction because sometimes it's easy to interpret these results as these are offers versus these are documented offers. And so we know that we can make huge improvements in this realm just by improving our documentation, and that is not any change to any clinical activity that is occurring. So an important distinction is that we can only report on those documented interactions. Clinical judgment. The provider and patient have many different agendas going on at the same time, and we always recognize that that there may be times when other care aspects are supersede screening, and it's always at the care provider's discretion to be appropriate in offering individual clinical maneuvers, and therefore the goal is not to achieve 100%. And then our last point that we really want to be clear on is that this is a chart sample. We know that this varies from provider to provider, but we will provide the number of charts that were sampled. That number is between 15 and 30. And so this does not reflect a full panel. This is a number that we would use based upon improvement science that tells us we can select a small sample and then use that number to help guide some of our improvement activities. So again, this is congruent with an improvement method versus an accountability or research type of a project. The next element of the baseline chart review talks about the unit of measurement. Again, a very important component to this review is remembering that we're not talking about patients who've been screened. ASaP is measuring the offers of those screens. So one patient may qualify for multiple offers, and those may or may not be completed or documented. So when we're providing the results on those 15 to 30 charts, we're not saying how many of those patients were screened, we're saying how many of the offers that were appropriate for those patients were offered. And then so we provide that here in writing so that it's easy to facilitate that conversation, but it is definitely something that requires some practice in terms of being able to clearly articulate the difference between an offer and a patient. I'll ask Bonnie if there's anything that she wanted to add in terms of this introductory component to the baseline chart review.
I think you've done a great job, Mark. Just to reiterate the point you were just making, I think at least one of the common questions that comes up is how many patients have I screened? And so this part of the report will help you to answer that question, that the unit of measurement is not the patient for this initiative.
Great, thanks, Bonnie. And if there are questions on the line, just as a reminder, Bonnie and Leanne are monitoring our questions in our chat line, so if you have something, please feel free to type it into your screen, or if you don't have access to your webinar, please feel free to just come in on the line, and we'd be happy to try to tackle these as we go today. The last piece of information on the report is probably what everybody's eyes jumps to immediately. So the first tip in presenting this information to physicians is that we don't hand them the report until we've had a chance to explain everything up top, or we will lose them. Their eyes jump immediately to the bottom, and then there's going to be a lot of questions about what this data means. So spending some time talking about those important elements at the beginning may, in fact, reduce the number of questions, or may help the provider with the interpretation of this primary data of the report. And so as you can see here, what is being reported are the number of documented screening offers that were found in the chart review, the number of opportunities, so the number of appropriate screens that patient sample had eligible, and then what is the percentage that those offers were documented compared to the overall number of opportunities. The last page of the baseline chart review provides a breakdown or a bit more detail on the individual maneuvers that were collected through that baseline chart review. Important to note here that height and weight, as we said, is one maneuver, but we know sometimes the issue is that height may not be recorded where weight might be more frequently recorded. So we break this out so that you can identify some opportunities to improve your screening by looking at sub-process measures. So in the case of height and weight, there are two distinct measures that are required, and are you getting both of them, or is it one or the other? You'll also note on this report that there is some text that reads "not measured." And important to understand that this does not mean that you weren't able to obtain the information from the record. This means this was a maneuver that was not chosen to be measured. So being very specific that this is information that you had chose not to receive, and so you did not collect this information. All right, so I think they've heard enough from you and I think it's perhaps time that we get a little bit of audience participation. And so in a moment, I will put up a screen for people to record their answers. But I'm interested, based upon what we've learned through our training session or what we've heard today or our experience with chart review reports, how would we define screening opportunities? Would we say that screening opportunities are the number of patients offered screening and prevention? Would we say screening opportunities are the number of documented screening offers? Is screening opportunities the number of screening maneuvers that were completed? Or are screening opportunities the total number of maneuvers that were appropriate for patients reviewed? So have you take a look at those options, and remember, if you want to answer A, B, C, or D. All right, you should have a poll open. Go ahead and feel free to answer the question the best you're able to. All right, I think we've got all of our answers. I'm going to apologize. I can't see the end result, but we had a bit of a distribution here. Bonnie, do you see that on your screen, or is it just mine?
No, I see the question is back up again.
The question now is the presentation back. Great. So Bonnie, if I were posing this question to you, how might you answer this question?
Well, I know that the unit of measurement is offer, not patient, so that rules out a couple, and I would answer D, that it's the number of maneuvers appropriate for the patient's review.
Excellent. And I think as you mentioned that we talk about the unit of measure, and the unit of measure is not the patient, it is about the maneuvers that are eligible or appropriate for the age and gender of those patients selected. So excellent. So the correct answer is D. Now we'll pose our second question here, and our screening offered means the number of patients who were offered screening, the number of appropriate screens offered to patients reviewed, the number of documented appropriate screens offered to patients reviewed, or the number of patients with a documented offer of screening. And I wonder on this time, June, I know you're on the line. And so June, I'm going to maybe put you on the spot here, and it's okay if you don't know the right answer. We want to have a discussion regarding this. So June, what do you think the answer here might be?
You put me on the spot, you bad boy. So, first of all, I'd like to say that this is one of those questions where I need a little more time to read them through.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many similar words in them that you need a little more time to answer. So, first I went to the number of appropriate screens offered to patients reviewed. But then I thought, no, it has to be documented. So I would go for C.
Correct, June. So you remembered a couple of the key principles. So A and D were wrong because we're not talking about the number of patients. And the difference between B and C is that one would be the screens that were offered, including those that aren't documented, versus those that were only documented. Excellent. See, that being put on the spot isn't too bad. The screening percentage. So this is the primary piece of information on the report. That's at the very bottom of the screen. It can be best described as the percentage of providers panel that have been screened, the percentage of patients reviewed that have been screened, the percentage of all appropriate screening maneuvers which have a documented offer for the patients reviewed, or the rate at which screening offers for all maneuvers are documented. And I think we had Lori DeBoer on here, so I'll put Lori DeBoer on the spot for this question and see if we can kind of work through how we might describe that screening percentage. So when the physician asks us, what does 56% mean? We might have a way of talking about it that's meaningful.
I was hoping to fly under the radar there, so thanks, Mark, very much for noticing that. Well, I think as your body has indicated that we're not to focus, the base measurement isn't the number of patients, so that would rule out statement B. Along with statement A, we rule that out because we're not looking at the entire panel. We've just, for the most part, taken a sampling of 15 to 30 charts. And I would have a sneaking suspicion it would probably be statement C because we're looking at the appropriate screening maneuvers and was it documented on those patients' files that we reviewed.
Good job, Lori. Excellent description of how you would work through that statement. So you're right. It is about the appropriate screening maneuvers on those patients that were reviewed and that were documented. So as you've said, A and D were not appropriate, and D is a bit of a tricky one there because it's talking about all maneuvers versus the appropriateness of maneuvers for the sample. So good job. Thank you.
You're welcome. You owe June and I.
So I think this is our last question, so I'll put this one back out to our entire audience. And this is thinking about page 3 of the report, and we said that there's screening data by maneuver. And we think that is important information to share with a provider. So what do you think the reason that we're providing that information based upon individual maneuver? Is it to indicate the frequency that a maneuver was appropriate for the patient sampled? Was it to facilitate which maneuver should be improved first? Is it about considering the reliability of their current screening process for certain maneuvers? Or is it to validate the results on the overall screening percentage? So I'm going to leave that up for a moment so you can work through them through process of elimination, but then I will put up another poll and let you have a chance to answer that question. So A, B, C, or D? Is screening data by maneuver provided to indicate the frequency that a maneuver was appropriate for patients sampled? Is it to facilitate which maneuver should be improved first? Is it to consider the reliability of current screening processes for certain maneuvers? or is it to validate the results of the overall screening percentage? Excellent audience participation. I definitely appreciate that you guys were ready for this one and you have your answers locked in. So I'll close that poll, and I think that gives you the responses we've received. The most correct answer here would be to consider the reliability of screening processes for certain maneuvers. So like we talked about with height and weight, they may be doing one of those really well, but to get the full value of doing height and weight as a maneuver, you may need to know, is there a sub-process between one and the other that is not working as well as the other? So answer is C. The answer D is true as well, but we didn't provide it for that perspective. So now we'll kind of progress from the baseline chart review report and move into the follow-up chart review report, and there are a couple of additional pieces of information that you will see in this report. So again, we start off with that introductory letter, some important information and their overall screening rate at the follow-up chart review, as well as how they did at the baseline. We provide those detailed screening rates so that, again, there's that ability to look a little bit deeper. Important that we have a different methodology, so we describe the methodology in the follow-up, and then we have a provincial baseline report that is attached to that follow-up report. So very similar to our baseline report, except that here you can clearly see in the second paragraph that now we're talking about a follow-up chart review. So just again, recentering the provider on what this information is, as well as what's included in this package. Starting with page 2, it looks very similar to what we covered in the baseline chart review, again, because we think that this is all very important and very dense information. So before handing the report over, again, always being mindful of what frame of reference we're bringing to this data. The calculations, again, so if you need to refresh in terms of, are we talking about patients, or are we talking about opportunities to provide screens? And then finally, the very bottom of the page, we have that primary data that's broken into 3 distinct components. So a lighter shading, a medium shading, and then a darker shading. The lightest shading talks about how they did at the baseline chart review, because we expect that that information may be not available or not easily found, or perhaps forgotten. The medium color talks about how they did at the 4-month follow-up chart review. So this is intended to be, after you've made some screening improvement, how are you doing now? And finally, the last one is the absolute percent change, which talks to the difference between their baseline and their follow-up result. I'm going to pause there because I've got Bonnie on the line. I think there's some questions and some chat that's happening, and so I'll give you a chance to jump in.
So this doctor who had that comment about I don't want to be judged, did they realize that this only goes to them and to you? No. And And you know what? I can't honestly say that I realized that either, because the introductory letter says it will be shared with your supporting PCM. Does that mean it's shared with everybody at the PCM? Okay. So, aggregate data is. Okay, well that's good. That's good for us to know. Are you back, Mark? Is that you?
Yes, my apologies. The technology isn't with me today. So
we fielded some questions and comments. Were you able to hear any of them, Mark?
I heard nothing. I'm not even sure what point I was disconnected. So I carried on up to the bottom of this page, and I realized that there were some questions and comments. So I was just pausing there to reconnect with the group.
Okay, yeah. So Lori and I were just fielding some questions while we were waiting for you to connect back in. We'll turn it back to you, but Dolores had some good points maybe we could get to afterwards. Thanks, Dolores.
Yeah, thanks, Dolores.
Sure.
So my apologies to the folks on the line. I'm going to assume that we didn't hear this page here. So again, it was a lot of information. Again, very similar to the baseline chart review. Again, just helping us frame this information that's being provided to the providers. Again, focusing on what is the unit of measurement as a reminder, and some of the definitions that we've been using in this project. At the bottom of the page is again that primary data point that that we think is the most important to convey, and it's broken up into 3 sections. The section that is lighter shade, a section that's in a medium shade, and then a section that's in a darker shade. So in the lighter shade is, again, a repeat of the information from the baseline chart review. The medium shade is the results from the 4-month follow-up chart review. So this is now the most recent chart review information. And then lastly, we have the absolute percent change. And so that's the difference between the 2 percentages at the baseline or at the follow-up. And that indicates, are we on the path of improvement? It doesn't necessarily prove that the changes have been beneficial, but it's meant to guide the decision-making around, are we moving forward in the right direction, or do we have other questions that we should consider? So this is where I was pausing to see if Bonnie had anything that she wanted to add regarding that very rich data piece at the bottom of the screen.
No, I think that's good. I just wanted to make it clear to the audience, in case they missed it, we are now talking about the follow-up chart review that comes 4 months after the baseline chart review.
Thanks, Bonnie. So I'd forgotten that we'd include a larger screen of this, so for those of you who have eyesight that's perhaps not as keen as mine, we've made this just a little bit bigger so you can see again, how that data is organized from the baseline data to the current follow-up data, as well as the difference between the two. And then, key reminders is the goal is that we want to see improvement, or we're hoping for improvement. That isn't always the case, and that doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't value to the process. But our goal is to be moving towards a positive change, and the goal isn't to reach 100%. The third page of the follow-up chart review provides a bit more detail again at the maneuver level. So the first column shows both the documented screens as well as the number of opportunities to provide that based upon the patient sample that was selected. The second column speaks to what is that in terms of a percentage for that maneuver. And then the final column is the change from the previous baseline chart review, so whether it is a positive change or a negative change. There is also some text, again, that appears on this screen, so not measured, meaning that maneuver was not selected for the provider. And should there be a could not calculate, that means that in either one of the two chart reviews there were no patients who were eligible for that maneuver. So we might see that one primarily around mammography, and if your sample doesn't include a woman in those right age ranges, you might get a 0 there just based upon the sample selection. All right, so I'm going to turn this one back to Bonnie because I know that she has such vast knowledge of this follow-up chart review. And we saw on that screen that that there's a possibility that the follow-up opportunities might be lower on the follow-up than they were on the baseline. And that might mean something for us. So we're not sure. Does that mean that fewer patients had followed up on their screening results? Could that mean fewer patient records were reviewed in the follow-up chart review? Would that mean fewer opportunities to screen patients existed in the follow-up sample based upon age, sex distribution? Or does it mean fewer patients were screened in the follow-up chart review? What do you think, Bonnie?
So I know that the intent is to sample the same number of charts at baseline or at follow-up. So it's not going to be that a different number of patient records were reviewed. But I know that many of the maneuvers have specific age and gender limitations, and so that will play a role in how many opportunities there are to screen. So I would say that the answer is C.
Correct. And so very nice rationale in terms that we know that there are certain things that we're collecting, so we're not measuring how many patients follow through on the screening offer in the standard chart review. And we know that we're selecting the same number of patients to sample in both. And as you've articulated, that there is varying opportunities based upon the age and sex or age and gender of the sample that was selected. So correct, the answer would be C. So I think this time we'll go back to our audience and we'll ask them about the absolute percentage change. So that was on the page of the report that was at the bottom of the page, and it was in that darker shading. And so if we were trying to describe what the absolute percentage change to a physician, would we be saying that it is the difference between the baseline and follow-up chart reviews? Would it be the statistically significant improvement in screening processes? Would it be the percentage of the panel that have received screening offers? Or would it be improvement in offers now being documented? So again, the absolute percentage change, how would we describe that? A, B, C, or D? All right. And I didn't include the slide here. So we think that it's going to either be A or D. And the answer we're looking for here is the answer is A. So the answer is the difference between the baseline and follow-up chart reviews. Answer D, I think, is probably pretty close in terms of if you were answering that, you're thinking about is that difference, is it an improvement, is it going in the positive direction, and related to a documentation being improved. So absolutely, it's one way you could think about it, but what we were looking here for was, describing it as the difference between the baseline and follow-up chart review. We hope it's an improvement, but may not necessarily be. Anything you wanted to add there, Bonnie?
No, I think you covered it, Mark.
Good, thanks. All right, so we'll go back to our polls. Follow-up screening data by maneuver. I think we covered this one in our baseline chart review, so we'll remember, why did we want to include that information for the provider? Was it to show which maneuvers are more reliably offered? Is it to indicate which maneuvers are improved the most? Is it to validate the results of the overall screening data? Or is it to assist the provider to consider further improvement or strengthening of processes? Bit of a trick question. We did throw a couple of these in here, and we mentioned that this does mean that they can, you do have the ability to validate the results, because the math on the second page should add up to the math on the third page. But really, we're providing it because there's an opportunity to look deeper at where there was improvement or lack of improvement, so that they can continue to strengthen their process as they move forward beyond their formal participation in ASaP. Page 4, again, just wanted to draw your attention that this is here because sometimes we get questions from providers asking, well, we haven't had very long to implement these new processes. If we measure now, aren't we going to measure a bunch of patients who we haven't had a chance to provide this opportunity to? And the answer is, you're correct. And so we have to address our sampling process so that we're only sampling patients where you've had an opportunity to try these new improved processes with. And so that's what page 4 talks about, is that when we sample it, we mimic whatever method they've chosen to focus their improvement on. So if they've focused on opportunistic approach, our sampling will focus on patients they've had a chance to intervene with through an opportunistic encounter. And if they've used outreach, we try to mimic that process that they use to reach out to patients to obtain that sample through there. So, and again, another page with a lot of information, important to understand that methodology is a bit different in case there are questions regarding that. So I see we're getting close on time, but I'll move us into the provincial baseline chart review report. This is something that we've added as a bit of a bonus to completing the follow-up chart review, because many providers really want to know, how do I stand compared to my colleagues? And in order to do this and maintain the confidentiality and anonymity of providers, we have to be a bit creative with how we present the data in order to maintain that confidence. So this page in the report summarizes the offers of screening completed from that baseline chart review by deciles. And so decile means the 10 percentage points. So on this screen you see 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 along the x-axis of the chart, and that represents physician scores between 20.1 and 30%, 30.1 and 40%, 40.1 and 50%, and so on. On the y-axis, we don't have the number of providers, but we can tell you the proportion of the providers that fit within that decile. So currently we have the 30% of providers in the 50.1 to the 60% screening offer. So if a physician asked you, what's happening in the province in terms of screening offers, we would say that right now the average score, which is listed in below that in the descriptive statistics, the average score is 51.4%. The lowest score is 24.7, and the highest is 73.8. How they would figure out where they fit would be look on the previous page, which shows their result. So in this case, if we look at the bottom of the screen, we have 56%, and we would see that they fit in the bar that is labeled 60. So this provider contributes to the proportion of providers in that 60th decile. Can be very challenging to think about this data. So there's another way we can do this, and this is just making some notes to ourselves or drawing on the paper by labeling the axis, so we show where 30 lies on as a point, and knowing that the extreme lowest value on the x-axis is 10 percentage points lower than the first number. We now know that in between 20 and 30, we have about 6% of the providers. And in between 50 and 60, you can see that it's fairly clear that that's about 30% of the providers. Sometimes we get asked, well, where do I fit on the curve? We assume that it's like back in school where people were graded on the bell curve, and that assumes a normal distribution. And as you can see here, we don't necessarily have a normal distribution, but we can draw a curve that roughly resembles what people would assume is a distribution curve. And then we can even apply things like what is the mean, and that gives you an idea now by plotting that provider's percentage, where do they fit roughly in the provincial baseline chart review report. I'm going to pause there because I know that this is a lot of new information for many of my colleagues as well as the IFs on the phone, and see, number one, if there are any particular questions about that being tricky, or if, Bonnie, if you had any comments that you wanted to add at this point before we move on.
Yeah, just to point out that this likely does introduce some new terms. And so if you do have questions about explaining this graph, don't be afraid to talk to your CPAs or to post a question on Yammer. I'm on Yammer as well and can certainly get back to you as quick as I can with an answer. Yeah, we're just hoping to make this as clear as possible.
Great. And as always, if you're processing this and you want to send an email after the webinar, that's excellent too. All right, so we'll go to our audience for audience participation. What is the proportion of providers who scored between 40.1% and 50%? Is it A, 18%, B, 16%, C, 30%, D, not sure, and I guess E will also be not sure. I'll give you a moment to look at the graph. Correct answer is 16%. 16% on this report fall under, don't have a little laser pointer, otherwise I could show it, fall under the category of 50. I see we're running close on time. We do have some other questions, so I'll just leave them on the screen, so if people choose to view these afterwards so that they have a further opportunity to kind of review from a practical perspective, they'll have an opportunity to see these in terms of answers, and as you follow along, you can take the quiz as well. Dr. Doe, I'll pause on this one. Dr. Doe reviews this report and says, why does this report have percentage of providers. Why not just say how many physicians scored between 30 and 40? How might you respond? Great question. Having both axes in the chart as percentage is very confusing. Indeed it is. This is to protect the anonymity of you and your other providers' results. Providing the number of providers in each category would allow somebody to identify individual physician result. I don't know. Let me contact my top clinical process advisor and ask. We hope that that's how you would answer that question. There may be maybe other opportunities to think about how you might answer it, but we definitely want you to know that it's important that we've protected the confidentiality, and that's why we've had to make this a bit more complex. And any time that we're not sure, the top CPAs are happy to try to field these calls. So important highlights, again, we've talked about the unit of measurement, that it's important that this data is used for improvement and not judgment or research. Some of the impacts to the data, what happens if you don't have panel well established before doing the chart review. You start to measure patients who are not part of the panel. Sample sizes are an important impact. Again, the larger the sample, the closer we can predict what's actually happening. But it doesn't mean that this is completely representative of what's happening in the entire panel. So those are just important things to be mindful of. We'll perhaps circle some of these questions that you might expect from the physician, either through the rest of this webinar or through Yammer. But there's an opportunity for you to start to pre-think about how you might answer questions from physicians, and what might be some suggested responses. So we may hear things like, I didn't do panel pre-work, should I do another baseline chart review? And, very fair question. We don't think there's any need to redo a chart review based upon not having a panel, because improvements to both documentation of the primary provider and the offers of screens is a desired outcome, and will just demonstrate improvement in both of those areas at the same time. Can they get more frequent updates? Sometimes we think about these as being a long time between reports. Absolutely. We certainly hope that providers are building in their processes as they're standardizing their data to get frequent routine measures from within their own systems. Can I choose to do different maneuvers? I didn't like my score on this particular maneuver. Can I redo it? Again, this is an improvement project, so if you don't, if a provider chooses not to do a maneuver, then there's no judgment attached to no improvement on that maneuver. It's completely about what the provider chooses or desires to do with their improvement, and that they don't need to redo a baseline just because they no longer choose to do that maneuver. If they want to add one, excellent. And we could even suggest that building that in terms of the standardization, they may be able to generate those measures directly at the clinic. So not necessarily need to redo just because you've had a change of heart in terms of which maneuvers are important to you. I'm already doing so well, why would I want to keep going? Well, the goal isn't 100%, but we definitely believe that there's always room for improvement. And so we would encourage providers to think about it that way. If you are that 73.8% and is there still opportunity to improve, we would think so. We hope that they would think that that would be an opportunity to proceed as well. Again, we talk about samples versus the whole panel. We do that because this is improvement work. We certainly hope that they get to the point where they can measure their whole panel. In our presentation, we talked about the difference between opportunistic and outreach in terms of our methodology, and we could simply answer that our measurement methodology matched the improvement activities that they did. Why is it 4 months past baseline? We want to keep the energy and the momentum moving forward, and so we've chosen a deadline, or in terms of a measurement strategy, that allows them to get some early indication of are they going on the right track before having to wait for an entire panel to be screened before knowing if these processes are leading to improvement. When are the next reports? Well, we certainly hope that they're building this process in and are thinking about doing monthly reports or quarterly reports from within the clinic. But in terms of the ASaP chart review, these are some of our planned measurement opportunities with the clinic. So following the follow-up chart review, if they wanted to submit sustainability, we would time that for 1 year after their baseline review. Questions you want to be thinking about when you talk to the provider. How accurately do you believe this data reflects your practice? Are there problems with the data that should be considered or corrected before use? Is this what you expected? Were you surprised? What does this data suggest to you regarding setting goals for improvement in your practice and prioritizing these goals? So I think those are all very valid questions and will help you as an improvement facilitator work with that team on their improvement journey. Lastly, ongoing supports. There is some evidence that has been cited and referenced, and that is there on your screen as well. We've got IHI Open School, Yammer, and your top CPA as your ongoing support and resource for your chart review report. I'll pause for questions and any comments from my colleagues.
Hi, Mark. This is Dolores, and I'm so sorry. I really have to exit. I'm due on another call right now.
Certainly, Dolores. My apologies for running late.
Thank you. I'll talk to Sandy later. Bye-bye. Mark, I see that there's a question posted that have been typed into our chat box going back to the provincial data that was presented. And the question is, does this mean that 6% of providers screened, 6% of providers screened over 70% of their patients appropriately? So I think to answer that question, first I would focus on what the unit of measurement is. So in ASaP, we're not reporting on the percentage of patients, but we're reporting on the number of offers compared to the number of opportunities. So in that example graph that we showed, what that means is 6% of providers offered 70% or more of the offers that were appropriate for the opportunities that they had. I don't know if I made that more complicated or if I answered the question. Feel free to post a follow-up.
Absolutely, Bonnie. And again, I'm not sure if we're hitting the mark with the asker or if they've had to leave, but we definitely view these as an opportunity to have a dialogue with people who are using these reports and getting feedback in terms of what's helpful and what's less helpful. So please provide us either your questions or your feedback. We appreciate that. Great. Well, if I don't hear anything else and I hear people needing to leave, so I think we'll draw the webinar to a close with the extended invitation to continue to engage top CPAs or myself and Bonnie around continued questions regarding these provider reports, and hope this has been helpful to you.